What is going on, everybody? So I hope you're having a good week, because I know the ROG Ally had a decent month. And for this month with the ROG Ally, honestly, my experiences have been pretty much perfect. I don't really have a lot to complain about. I haven't had any SD card reader issues or button issues or anything like that. There was no malfunctioning on my device, so I don't really have anything to complain about. But I can't really say the same about a lot of YouTubers out there. They took every chance they could get to post some kind of clickbait, but I'm honestly having a great time with the device. I've been playing mostly everything I would play on the Steam Deck on the ROG Ally. I've been mainly testing it out to see how far I could push it, and especially the SD card. I've ran a few tests on it, and I was transferring files for about 12 hours straight with the SanDisk and a Samsung SD card. I have every kind of SD card you could think of, except for those off-brand third-party ones, and I haven't spotted any kind of issues. I honestly believe that this SD card issue is completely random with certain units. It's unfortunate, but I have taken precautions against a potential SD card malfunction, and I thought for the ROG Ally's 1 month anniversary, I could list off everything I do to avoid breaking my SD card on my ROG Ally. And there's certain things I have to address. I'm finally going to address a lot of these issues that have been happening. It's not that I don't think these malfunctions and bugs are real. I do completely think they're real, but I also think they're random. And it has been officially confirmed by Asus that thermals are in fact causing SD cards to malfunction. But they haven't pointed out exactly what kind of instances you would have to go through to run into these thermal issues that push your SD card enough. And there are a few more tests out there by the Fox, and he hasn't been able to replicate any of these thermal throttles or just malfunctions in general. But it started to make me think, what could cause an SD card to fail? Now, there's a certain number of things that an SD card can do and is capable of right off the bat. You can download, transfer, and that's usually the first thing people do with SD cards in order to play a game. The game's not just going to magically appear on your SD card. And it seems SD cards downloading from Steam aren't well supported on Windows to begin with. I've tested a couple SD cards on the ROG Ally, gaming laptops, and my desktop PC, and the results were pretty much the same. The download speeds were very slow, and for some reason it was specifically on Steam on Windows. It seems like it throttles downloads, and on an SD card specifically. With any other launcher, I get normal download speeds, but I came up with a slight fix for this, which I'll get into in a bit. Now, the differences between the most common use case for people using Windows and downloading games on Steam is to download it to a hard drive or an SSD. And I'm sure that people aren't just picking up gaming laptops and using SD cards on them. And if they were, they'd probably be seeing these similar issues. Now, I do find it weird that downloads, specifically on Steam and Windows, have been getting throttled. And I wouldn't be surprised if this is the main way everyone is baking their SD cards. When downloading from Steam, if you notice, the download is jumping to, say, 100 megabits per second, then dropping all the way down to 0 bits per second. Now, this is kind of an anomaly to a lot of people. They blame the SD card driver for it and say that reinstalling the SD card will fix it. But I've tried this out on multiple gaming laptops that have SD card readers, and it works perfectly fine on everything else. But when I try to download from Steam specifically, for some reason SD cards aren't very well optimized on that. And to put less stress on your SD card while downloading, all you need to do is set the download limit speed to 25 or 30 megabits per second, and you should see the download speed become more consistent. Not completely consistent, but just a little more consistent. You won't see those 0 megabits per second drops for more than 1 second at a time if it happens. But I would assume this is what people are mostly doing with their SD cards. They say that it happens when they transfer files, but pushing your SD card to the point that it downloads 200 megabits per second when it's not supposed to, and then it drops rapidly, could be a result of the bandwidth being too high. I wouldn't be surprised if this is the main cause for the SD card's overheating. When the SD card gets up to a certain download speed, it reaches its cache load limit, and that could heat up an SD card quite a bit. In fact, it can damage the card over time. Using your SD card with Windows is a risk in general. The only reason why this doesn't happen on Steam Deck is because for some reason, Valve has optimized Steam Deck to work better with an SD card. At first, this was kind of happening on the Steam Deck as well, but if you're using an older SD card, especially one that you used to use with the Steam Deck, you'll notice that it has slowed down quite a bit, especially when you go back to using it with Windows. This is the exact reason why my 1 terabyte SD card crapped out on the Steam Deck, because the Steam Deck pushes SD cards, especially while it downloads, to its very limit and then some. But with Windows, it kind of senses these throttles throttles and limits and gives you a realistic speed on how fast you should download to your SD card. Now, I put the 25 to 30 megabit per second limit on it, and it seemed to heat up the SD card a lot less. But there are other ways I avoid messing up the SD card, which I'll get to. This is just the first pointer. I wouldn't be surprised if this is just a Steam issue, but that's kind of jumping the gun. Let's get back to the point. Pretty much the first advice I'll give you is to make sure to limit download speeds, and your SD card shouldn't be reaching its limit anytime soon while doing a simple task like downloading. And besides that, there are other instances that could overheat your SD card and throttle its speed. I usually use a third-party 65-watt charger, so the system doesn't go into 30 watts automatically, which will bring up the power, speed, and performance of the Ally. And when you're plugged in, the system is relying on the charger and not the battery, so it doesn't have to overheat anything. If it was relying on the battery, it would just probably blow it up. Instead, when you have a third-party charger plugged in, it will default to 25 watts. Therefore, you still get the turbo speed, but you're not pushing your ROG Ally to its very limits at 30 watts. And I do advise not using the 30-watt turbo mode, because that seems to be a lot of the cases that are starting this overheating issue. Now, I have plenty of third-party chargers, so using other chargers seems to help the system temperature when playing in turbo, so I would advise using a third-party 65-watt charger, just for the meantime until Asus looks into the matter further. Sticking to 25 watts is probably the safest bet. Also, with demanding titles like Street Fighter 6, sometimes it's best not to download while you're playing, only with demanding titles. Just like with the Steam Deck, the SD card will become overwhelmed and slow down, and with the air coming from the vent, I wouldn't take a risk to download something at high speeds and play a game that's demanding off the same SD card. You're just asking your card to crap out on you if you do that. If you do have to download something while you're playing a game, I advise playing a game straight from your internal SSD. If you're downloading something to your SD card, that's what I usually do. Or if you need to, you can attach an external hard drive or SSD to play something on your ROG Ally while you're downloading on your micro SD card, just to take that extra precaution for your micro SD. And sometimes, depending on the game you're emulating, with a lot of Xbox 360 games, emulating from a micro SD card can be taxing, to say the least. It won't fry your card outright, but the experiences I get from playing Halo Anniversary in co-op split screen mode on an SD card compared to the internal SSD is night and day. It just seems like the SD card can't handle it, so I wouldn't emulate taxing titles on the SD card exclusively. And I've tried 3 different types of SD cards, and the same thing seems to happen when I play something as complicated as a co-op game on Xenia. And besides all of those extracurricular and extensive precautions you should take with your micro SD, there are some common sense ones that you probably know about, but I'll say it anyway. Make sure not to defragment your micro SD card, because that does require some CPU power, so it makes the system run hot, but you do run a risk of corrupting your SD card if you defragment it. And this one's honestly a given if you know anything about hard drives, but a lot of people are using SSDs now, and you don't need to defragment those either. And the same goes for micro SD cards. So yeah, no defragmenting your micro SD card. And just like Valve and Nintendo warned you, playing the ROG Ally in hot places like a car without an AC in the spring or summer, or just outside when it's above 90 degrees, will most likely overheat the system and the micro SD card. And the little guy can't handle it. So make sure you're playing in a place that's well ventilated, because that won't only improve the SD card performance, but it'll improve your ROG Ally's health too. And even if you are playing in a well ventilated location, avoiding cramped areas where the Ally's heat could get trapped is probably a smart idea. And this means small shelves close to a wall, face down on a table. You have to make sure the ROG Ally gets plenty of ventilation, even if you are in a well ventilated location. Even though it's a handheld, when docked or tabletop, I try to leave enough space between the ROG Ally and other objects. Just like with the PlayStation and Xbox, that's just a rule of thumb at this point. So make sure you're getting plenty of ventilation at all times. And out of anything to avoid in this list, the most important thing, after you're done with whichever micro SD card you're playing on, make sure to select the Safely Remove Hardware and Eject Media tab on the right side of the taskbar. No matter what you're using, albeit a portable SSD or micro SD card, In Windows, properly ejecting your SD card is key to increase its longevity and health, and this will effectively avoid corrupting your card. If you don't select this option, it might automatically corrupt your card. And I put up a poll recently, and surprisingly, there were a lot of people who don't properly eject their SD card or don't even know about the option. This can mean big trouble for your micro SD card in the long term if you don't properly eject it. So make sure to eject from the taskbar whenever you're done with your micro SD. You'll thank me later. And finally, your microSD and ROG Ally's SD card slot probably get used more than any other part of the system. So make sure to dust the SD card slot off or slightly blow on it every once in a while to get rid of any dust buildup. With your microSD card, it's best to clean any dirt or fingerprints from the gold contacts on the back of the card. This is the most important part of the microSD, so make sure to clean it with a microfiber cloth. I usually keep a few laying around just in case. It's similar to a CD in the old Xbox 360 days, but it's a lot more durable and small. And because it's smaller, it's important to keep those gold contacts clear. And I guess some extra advice to give you guys would be if you are running into a slower SD card, or if your micro SD is running into some strange issues, I advise returning it and getting a new one. A lot of the time, SanDisk and even Samsung just make DOA micro SDs, and there's nothing you can really do to make it better if the SD card is working strange on most platforms you try it on. It's just something that's unavoidable. But going back to the download speed limits, I would advise putting that download speed to 25 or 30 megabits per second. That, out of anything in the list, will help you avoid these SD card issues that a lot of people are getting. And this could just be a case of Valve not taking care of Windows properly. So while using Steam on Windows, just make sure to take those extra precautions. But yeah, that's pretty much all the advice I could give on what to do to avoid frying your SD card. And I figure I'd do a little something different for the 1-month anniversary video for ROG Ally, because I've already talked about a lot of positive things with this handheld PC. And I just wanted to address the micro SD card issue and how I specifically avoid pushing it too far. And if you follow these steps, most likely you're not going to get that issue either. But who really knows what the future holds? Let's just hope that Asus gives proper support for this issue, because for some reason they didn't see it coming. I think a company like Asus should have better foresight, and they should have better testers and quality control. Because if they can't see something as simple as heat messing with a tiny micro SD slot, then that's just going to make a lot of people question what else they missed. But chances are that this is a firmware issue and the thermals are being messed with by other means than what Asus predicted would happen. Because there are usually a lot of updates. You have the Windows update, Steam, Armory Crate, and just drivers in general. There are just so many more things to consider when playing a handheld PC with Windows. And like I said before, this isn't the first time that I've run into micro SD card issues on a Windows gaming PC. I would chalk it up to just being a Windows issue, and possibly that a lot of people don't update properly, because even the thermal system in the ROG Ally has updates. So you just have to make sure you're all up to date and you take these precautions, and hopefully your SD card will be okay. But yeah, let me know what you think about this micro SD issue. Do you think it'll eventually be fixed, or do you think the community itself needs to fix and make precautions for it? I think both are true. You should be careful and you shouldn't push your handheld too far, but you should also pay attention to what Asus has to say. And even though all of these other platforms are well established, you have to make sure you limit your download speed and question other platforms like Steam, because they're not perfect. Sometimes applications can mess up hardware. In fact, most of the time applications can mess up hardware. There is a lot to consider. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and happy 1-month anniversary to the ROG Ally. Later.